Welcome to a new deep dive.
Glad to be here.
We've got a really significant piece of information to unpack today. This is especially true if you're involved with GSA, multiple awards schedule contracts, MAS contracts. You sent over this alert from Holland Knight. It's dated June 12th, 2025. And, well, it details a pretty massive shift coming from the GSA.
It really does. It's big news in the GSA world.
So our mission today, let's try to cut through the jargon, get straight to what this change actually is, maybe a bit of its history, and what it really means for contractors, like right now and in the near future.
Sounds good.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Right. And the headline news from this alert, it's kind of impossible to miss, really. The GSA is making transactional data reporting, TDR, you'll hear it called mandatory, and they're expanding it dramatically.
Mandatory and expanding. Okay.
Yeah, it starts rolling out pretty soon, actually, end of June 2025. Initially, it's covering 62 new product and cloud service special item numbers, the SINs.
Via a mass mod, right. That's standard for these kinds of updates.
Exactly, a mass modification. It's how GSA pushes out changes across the board. But the really crucial part is what comes next. It's going to expand to all remaining MAS SINs starting in fiscal year 2026.
All remaining. Wow.
Yep. And the report, it quotes GSA directly here saying TDR participation will now be mandatory for SIN holders. Pretty clear.
So this isn't just like a minor tweak to a clause. This feels fundamental. A fundamental change in how these contracts will operate.
That's exactly it. This marks a really significant pivot away from the, let's call it the traditional requirements for MAS contracts.
You mean the CSP and PRC stuff?
Precisely. The commercial sales practices, CSP disclosures, and the whole price reductions clause, PRC requirements. For the SINs that fall under TDR, that system is changing.
Okay. You've shared this crucial alert, and now we're going to try and guide you, the listener, through the key points, help you understand what really matters here.
Let's do it.
So let's kick off with the core concept. What is TDR reporting, practically speaking, according to this report? And how's it really different from what contractors were doing before?
Okay. So according to the alert, TDR requires contractors, the ones participating, to submit monthly reports.
Monthly, okay.
Monthly. And these aren't just high-level summaries. They need to include the actual prices paid for specific GSA MAS products and services that were sold during that month, plus some other transactional data.
And the key difference is?
The key differentiator, the report highlights, is that this reporting is done on a line item basis.
Line item basis. Okay, hold on. So instead of dealing with like broad pricing policies or tracking against maybe one specific basis of award customer price,
right,
GSA now wants the granular details of every single transaction that goes through the contract, each line on an invoice.
Precisely. Yeah, think about the old system, the CSP and the PRC's basis of award monitoring. You were essentially demonstrating that the price you gave GSA was fair compared to a benchmark, right?
Yeah.
Usually a specific commercial customer's price. And you had to track that relationship.
Lots of paperwork.
Absolutely. With TDR, GSA is basically saying, look, just show us the specific price and the details for every single line item on every single invoice you processed through this MAS contract this past month. It's a fundamental shift from tracking a benchmark relationship to actually seeing the real-time market price for every single transaction within the GSA schedule ecosystem itself.
Wow. Okay, that is a significant increase in just the sheer volume and detail of data GSA is collecting.
Huge increase.
Now, this didn't just materialize out of thin air, did it? The alert you sent, it traces a history for TDR.
Absolutely not. It's been evolving. The report tells us the TDR initiative actually goes back quite a way to June 2016. That's when GSA first implemented a voluntary pilot program.
Voluntary back then.
Voluntary, yeah. And that pilot, it rolled out over about a year and was, well, pretty limited at first. It covered only 63 SINs, I think, out of over 300 MAS at the time.
And what kind of SINs were those?
It focused mainly on categories like office products, some equipment, tools, hardware, that kind of thing. Participation was totally optional then, and they were collecting 12 specific data fields per transaction.
And was anything specifically not included even back in that pilot phase?
Yes, that's actually a really interesting point the report makes. It notes that right from the very beginning, the TDR rule and the pilot program specifically excluded the federal supply schedule contracts that are administered by the VA, the Department of Veterans Affairs.
Ah, okay. So VA FSS was always separate from this TDR push.
Always separate. And that distinction, the report highlights, is important, and it still persists today.
Okay. So it started small, voluntary pilot back in 2016, VAFSS kept separate. What happened between then and now? Did it just sort of sit there?
Well, there was a bit of a quiet period, it seems, but then things really started to ramp up significantly in 2024. The alert points to a couple of key mass modifications that year. In April 2024, GSA issued one mass mod, specifically to the pilot participants, to expand the number of data fields they were collecting. Bumped it up from 12 to 16 fields.
Getting more data.
Yep. Then, in August 2024, another mass modification came out, and this one dramatically expanded TDR eligibility. It added another 67 SINs to the program.
Okay, so that brought the total up quite a bit.
Right, brought the total number of eligible SINs up to 131. And these new additions included most sort of non-configurable product offerings across several big categories, IT, industrial products, and more.
So the pilot slowly but surely grew. More data points being collected, covering more types of products, which I guess leads us directly to this current announcement, making it mandatory and expanding it massively.
That's the trajectory.
What else did GSA do in 2024, according to the alert? Anything else to prepare for this?
Yeah, the report does mention that also in 2024, GSA developed specific compliance assessment procedures just for TDR data, and they introduced new field controls within their sales reporting portal, the SRP system.
Tightening up the process.
Exactly. It was all part of refining the system, improving the quality, and maybe the usability of the data they were capturing through TDR. Preparing the ground, you could say.
So the history really shows this gradual evolution, doesn't it? From a limited pilot to broader eligibility, adding features, refining procedures, and now, bam, this major leap to mandatory for almost everything under the MAS program.
That's the picture, yeah.
Looking at all of this then, what does the report highlight as the key implications for MAS contractors? What should they be thinking about?
Well, the most direct implication, the one that probably jumps out first, is the elimination of the need for those traditional CSP disclosures and that PRC basis of award monitoring and reporting.
For the SANs moving to TDR.
Correct, for the MAS SNs that fall under TDR.
Right.
Once TDR is fully rolled out across all MAS SNs in FY26 as planned, that whole old compliance framework largely goes away for those specific contracts.
That is a huge administrative shift for contractors. I mean, potentially simplifying in one way, but maybe adding complexity elsewhere.
It's definitely a shift.
How does this report suggest this change might impact the types of companies holding these contracts? The contractor base itself.
That's an interesting angle the alert touches on. It suggests that this mandatory shift to TDR is likely to be perhaps more appealing to commercial businesses.
Why is that?
Well, the reasoning given in the alert is that these commercial businesses often already have the kinds of sophisticated systems and internal capabilities needed to capture this really detailed line item transaction data, for their own commercial operation.
So the reporting burden might be lower for them.
Potentially, yes. The report posits that this change could maybe lead to more commercial businesses deciding to pursue MAS contracts simply because the government's procurement processes, at least in this area, are aligning more closely with standard commercial data tracking practices.
Interesting. It sounds like GSA might be trying to lower a specific kind of barrier to entry, the one related to complying with the old CSP/PRC rules, especially for companies whose internal systems are already set up for detailed sales data capture.
That seems to be a plausible interpretation based on the alert, yeah.
And does the report mention anything about audits or investigations? Does this change things for the GSA OIG, the Inspector General?
Yes, it does touch on that. The report notes that, kind of as a consequence of moving away from CSP and PRC basis of award requirements for these MAS SINs under TDR, the GSA Office of Inspector General Investigations that specifically focus on compliance with those old MAS contract terms and conditions, well, they're likely to become narrower in scope. Fewer avenues to investigate under that old framework, presumably.
Makes sense. If the rules change, the focus of compliance checks has to change too.
Right.
Okay, so we've sort of tracked the history. We've got a better handle on what TDR is and how it's different from the old CSP/PRC system. And we've looked at some pretty significant implications for contractor operations, maybe the types of companies involved, and even GSA's own oversight.
That's the picture painted by this Holland Knight alert, yes. It's definitely a move towards, greater price transparency for GSA, achieved through collecting this very granular data. And it fundamentally changes the compliance landscape for MAS contracts.
Okay, so let's try and bring all this together from the report.
Right.
If you had to boil it down, what are the absolute must-knows, the biggest takeaways you see from this alert for our listeners?
Okay, the absolute number one headline is TDR is becoming mandatory for almost all GSA MES contracts, and importantly, it's replacing the old CSP and PRC requirements for those specific SINs.
That's the core change.
That's the core. It starts hitting soon 62 new product and cloud SINs via a mass mod by the end of June 2025. Then, the big one, it expands to all remaining MAS SINs starting in fiscal year 2026.
And for contractors, the action item is?
For contractors, the alert strongly implies it's critical to ensure you have the internal systems, the processes, the resources, whatever it takes to be capable of capturing that detailed line item transactional data accurately and submitting it every single month to be compliant. That's the new operational reality.
Got it. Systems readiness is key.
Yeah.
Now, what about that distinction you mentioned earlier regarding the VA FSS? That seems like a crucial detail this report makes clear, doesn't it?
It is. It's a really key carve-out, and the report is explicit about it. Despite this massive, sweeping expansion of TDR across the GSA MAS program, this change does not apply to the federal supply schedule contracts administered by the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs.
It's still separate.
Still totally separate. Those VA FSS contracts, the report confirms, will continue operating under the traditional rules. CSP disclosures, PRC basis of award monitoring and reporting requirements. The old way, basically.
Wow. So it's entirely possible, maybe even likely for some companies, that a contractor could hold both a GSA MAS contract and a VA FSS contract.
Oh, absolutely.
And they'd have to manage compliance under two completely different pricing rule sets, side by side, simultaneously.
That appears to be exactly the landscape this report describes, yes. Two different worlds, potentially, for federal schedule contracts, depending on the agency.
That's fascinating complexity right there.
Yeah.
Okay, here's maybe a final thought for you, the listener, to consider, really prompted by the information in this alert. Think about the potential ripple effects here.
Okay.
You have GSA, a huge government buyer, aligning its procurement practices much more closely with the commercial world, at least in terms of demanding this granular transactional data through TDR.
Right, moving towards commercial-style data.
But then you have another really significant government purchasing channel, the VA FSS, maintaining that fundamentally different approach, the one centered on CSP and PRC disclosures and basis of award tracking.
This raises an important question. How will businesses, especially those operating in both arenas, navigate these two very different compliance environments? And, could that difference actually influence which contracts they pursue more aggressively, or maybe even which ones they prioritize keeping?
Exactly. Does one become more attractive than the other depending on your internal systems or your risk tolerance? So perhaps you hold a MAS contract yourself, or maybe you're business partners with contractors who do, or perhaps you're just interested in understanding how government procurement is evolving, particularly in this digital age. This deep dive, based on this Holland Knight alert, should give you the essential information you need to understand what seemed like a pretty pivotal moment for GSA schedules.
It certainly seems that way.
Thanks for bringing this source material for our deep dive today.
My pleasure. Always interesting to see these shifts unfold.